Maybe it will be different this time. Justin McCoy joins us today from Moonlight Mountain Recovery. He talks about the importance of self-care and recovery and differentiating between your healthy thoughts and the addict mind. He believes connection is the opposite of addiction, but discusses protecting your story. He says some people are ready for recovery and some people aren't, and highlights the power of daily rituals and acts of service. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
All right, we are here today and super excited to have Justin McCoy with us. Justin is with Moonlight Mountain Recovery. That's an organization, a facility that does substance abuse and you do quite a bit of mental health up there, Justin?
We do, actually. Dual diagnosis,
diagnosis
the residential.
In Idaho. And they're growing. Justin will talk about that a little bit. Justin and I have known each other and worked together here for a few years now, and he's got a fantastic story, but he also has a lot of experience in the industry and some wisdom to share there as well. And so, super excited to have you on, Justin.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate the opportunity. It's very nice.
Okay, so let's start out with something a little fun and a little bit light. Tell us something that most people don't know about you.
So I present myself as an extrovert because I need to, and kind of the executive position that I hold, and just, as a mentor to others in recovery. But I'm actually deep down an introvert, and I have to force myself to do those things like networking and reaching out to others instead of letting them come to me. And so it's been great for my recovery because that those connections that I'm building, I would have lost out on otherwise if I had continued to stay what initially I feel like doing. So I got to get out of myself quite a bit.
Well, as an introvert, or as is that your predominant way of being? You got to kind of have some alone time and some I don't know, regroup time?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, self-care is essential. I work in recovery, and, I have to remember that I've got to have my self-care, and whether it's going to the gym in the morning or it's giving myself a cap on the weekends for, time worked, going to personal recovery meetings, or just decompressing. It's definitely something like I will turn my cell phone off, and it's kept me sane, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of relate to that. I'm a introvert by nature, extrovert by initiative, by choice, right?
Yeah.
Because it's important, and I love relationships. It's the funniest kind of dynamic, but it's like that quiet time, which I don't know if I allow myself enough self-care. For years and years I was like, what is self-care? Like, what does that, what you say it's self-care, but what does that really mean, and how do I apply that?
And I don't think I fully understand it yet completely, because I will become a workaholic at times, and I will give more of myself than I probably should. There's always that constant progression to be a better version of me, and so I definitely don't have the self-care thing down.
Right. Well, and there's also something about staying busy. I find a great deal of happiness in being busy, and helping other people, and not always taking care of myself. But those things bring me a lot of happiness. So is that self-care? Isn't that self-care? It's hard to know.
I think it is. Yeah.
I think it is too, but there can be too much too, and then the workaholic thing.
Yep.
I remember I swore, right, because I swore I wasn't going to give so much of myself to work, right? I was going to have this great balance, and it is challenging. It's
Yeah,
challenging.
yeah, it's definitely challenging, and especially when I have, so many goals right now with what I want to be doing in the industry. It's very challenging because I will definitely work more than what I tell myself I should be working, and it's hard to know my limits. But yet, on other times, like you have to know your limits, and sometimes my limits are actually pointed out to me by others. Taking that feedback from some of my supportive peers of like, hey, you've been working quite a bit, or what are you doing for you lately? Have you been to a meeting lately? Have you, I got invited to a retreat actually tomorrow, and it's a big book retreat over in Lava Hot Springs, and it's a friend of mine in recovery, and he says, what are you doing for you? He's an owner of a facility, and he says, what are you doing for you, man? Like, you've got a lot going on. And I said, this week, not much. And he said, okay, let's go to this big book retreat I got going on. And I said, for sure.
Wow,
So,
that's
yeah.
cool. And you've got to have a lot of people in the community, in the recovery community, that are, checking in with you,
Yes.
which is part of recovery, right?
Yeah, and I think early on in my recovery, I distanced myself from those people for sure, because I really struggled with reaching out, to others for help. I spent my childhood, being taught to, not reach out for help, to, be self-sufficient, to not, just present myself at a certain way. And so those learned behaviors are really hard to get out of.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't know if you're alone in that, because that would seem to be a message for, even for me, and I will say I didn't necessarily experience a ton of abuse or, a lot of neglect, but still the message that was sent is you can depend on yourself, and you can't really trust anyone else. And that seems to be even accentuated, loud when you become, when you have an addiction, or you have some of those other patterns, mental health or whatever. That seems to be loud and clear.
Yeah. I think the other part of that too is the emotional piece of like, don't show your true emotions, don't be vulnerable. That was how I was raised, was to not cry, not talk about your emotions. My father used to say, I'll give you something to cry about, those types of, generational mentalities. And they really affected me. And, it's something that I have to continually recognize that I'm still doing, and then take that time to kind of step back and think, okay, that's an old way of thinking. Like that's a previous pattern that I've done before that doesn't really get me anywhere. And so I kind of have to shift my, way of thinking and try something new this time.
Yeah, there's lots of challenges, lots of skills that we learn along the way, and I don't think we're ever done on the journey.
Definitely not. But I do find that when I am continually learning, I'm happier. When I'm challenging myself to learn new things, I'm happier. And I'm a big 12-step person, and so like they teach the back to the basics meetings. Like, there's certain basics that I don't stray from anymore. But on the other hand, like, I have to continually evolve and learn and just challenge myself, because that's what keeps me happy.
Yeah, that makes sense, and super important. We probably ought to talk, something we haven't shared or talked about is your story. How did you, what were you doing before recovery? Have you always been in recovery? And then, how did you end up in recovery?
Yeah, definitely. So, my story is definitely one of struggle. I started using drugs and alcohol at a very young age. I was 12 years old when I first started, using cannabis and, drinking. And I did those things because I didn't like who I was. I always wanted to be like that guy. I was always the person that felt that I was the outcast and awkward. I was having just this struggle forming, connections with others. And so using drugs and alcohol gave me those false connections with others, with the world. And then, along the way, it became, an addiction and a habit and, a pattern and a behavior. And, I spent, I got married at a young age. I jumped from relationship to relationship, just trying to seek out, those connections, but they were unhealthy. And I was never truly at a point where I loved myself. I got married at a young age. I have 2 wonderful children. I got divorced at a young age. I started to really just lash out behaviorally and in my addiction. I started using a lot of heavier drugs, meth and heroin, and I went from smoking and thinking like, oh, I'll never be that guy that shoots up drugs. I'm a better drug addict than those other ones, right?
Right?
like I've got my job still.
Yeah.
Like I haven't lost my job. I haven't lost my car. Like I'm a functional drug addict, but like those things left too. Like I lost my job, I lost my car. In fact, I lost several cars and several jobs and several relationships. And, one of my very early defining moments for me was when my ex-wife would play these messages. She would call when I wouldn't come home, and she'd put my daughter on the phone. And I hear my daughter say, "Daddy, please come home. I miss you."
Whoa.
And in my addiction, I'd say, screw her, and I'd hang it up. And I'd get so angry, and I'd stay out for another few days without coming home. And it wasn't until that I'd have those small moments of sobriety, and I'd re-listen to that message, and it would hit me, deep down into my heart. But that was very short-lived. Like, it got me to reach out for help for moments, but then, the lack of connection, the lack of support, the lack of additional treatment, and caused me to, well, not caused me, I chose, to relapse again. And I did that pattern, Shelley, for, I don't know, 15 years or so. I would get months clean. Everything would be great. Kids would be like, Daddy's home, families back together. And then I would disappear again, and I had these moments where I did not reach out for help. Like I told myself, I'm going to go use, and then I didn't tell on myself to anybody. And then I just got it stuck in my head, and so I'd go use. But I kind of went through that pattern, and I was arrested several times. I, had some pretty severe charges. I was homeless. I was in and out of work. But getting out of jail, I would get a year or so into my recovery, into my, I should say sobriety. And then I would relapse again. And looking back now, I see that it was those little connections, the vulnerability, the honesty, and the connection. Those 3 things were missing. And then that overall just willingness to work on myself, that true healing.
So do you believe that the opposite of addiction is connection?
100%, yeah.
Like no doubt in your mind?
No doubt in my mind. Like I am a full testament that like when I build and connections in my life, when I can be vulnerable and authentic with people, it fills that hole, that need for anything and everything else. I mean, hands down. I think there's some very strong mental health, aspects of it as well. Like I've got, I have tons of shame that I had to work through. Those deep down feeling unlovable, unwanted. And I had to go through a process of feeling those emotions to heal. And for so many years of my life, I just didn't want to. I built up, a very strong ego defense of, all these little, ego defenses that we have, avoidance and denial and.
Well, they're there to protect us, right? And so we use them in harmful ways to protect ourselves. But it sounds like that was true for you even at a super young age.
Yeah.
To where you just did not like who you were and you needed a way to change that.
I did. I felt like I was, like I said before, I felt like I wanted to be like that guy. Like I was never happy with who I was. I don't remember, like I can't pinpoint a certain like embarrassing moment where somebody made fun of me and I, thought, oh, I can't be my true self. But I always felt that way, of that I could never be who I wanted to be because I felt I wouldn't be accepted. And so I always held back. Yeah.
And so now you've been how long into sobriety?
So 9 years.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That's really incredible.
Yeah, it's been a bumpy road, and I have had slips, and, it's been, but, I like to talk about true recovery. Like there's a difference between, they call it white knuckling it in the rooms. Like I'm on a recovery journey, and, that is the true place to be, because it's a lifestyle change. It's a paradigm shift of thinking, and just not using drugs and alcohol doesn't achieve happiness unless you do those other things with it.
So it's not just about the white knuckling and not using, it's about truly changing everything about what's going on inside, the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you connect with other people.
100%.
And where do you get that connection? What made the difference, right? Because you struggled with sobriety for years and years, and then you were able to make that shift. Do you have things you can pinpoint?
Yeah, I've got quite a few, actually. I have a few defining moments. I just got plain old sick and tired of being sick and tired. I picked myself up and I relapsed, and I picked myself up and I relapsed so many times, and I just had so much shame and guilt for things that I had done, and the crying of the kids and the disappointed family, and people just wanting to wash their hands of me, because I did some very hurtful things, that I just realized that it was easier to work on recovery than it was to go back to relapsing. Like the pain of staying the same was worse than the pain of change. Like that was a huge defining moment for me. The pain of staying the same was worse than the pain of change. And so I chose the pain of change. And granted, there's a lot of pain.
There's a lot of pain.
Yeah, a lot of pain with the change. But, that was a huge defining moment for me. And I had that defining moment in 2009. And, it wasn't until 2012 or so when I really had that long-term, when I entered what I call recovery, And at that point, like, you have these moments of, they call it the pink cloud, in the 12-step rooms. You get super gung-ho for your recovery, and you go to a lot of meetings, and you read the book, and and then all of a sudden the pink cloud disappears, and, life smacks you again, and you're like, oh, like maybe I could use again. Maybe this time will be different.
Nobody's ever thought that before.
Right? It's not different. And, that's the vulnerability and the honesty. That's where that kicks in. Like, I fully believe in sponsors, and sponsoring people and going to meetings.
Do you have a sponsor now?
I do. Yeah.
Do you have more than one?
I have one sponsor, and he has a sponsor, and I sponsor 2 people.
And what do those relationships do for you?
So, I think they keep me accountable. They hold me accountable. I hold the other people accountable. I have a connection that I am continually building, a relationship, with somebody who I consider to be a very dear friend, somebody who I can trust and tell anything to. When I have those creep-in thoughts of that I could use again, like I can reach out to him and be honest and be like, I'm thinking about using today. And he won't just say like, well, why would you do that after everything you've been through? That's a comment I would get from a family member if I told him.
Right.
But not from a sponsor.
Yeah.
He'd be like, wow, like, what else you got going on in your life? Like, why do you think you want to use? Like, are you stressed? Like,
yeah.
How's that going to work out? Like, let's play the tape through a little bit,
Well, and I think there's something, at least as I've noticed this in my relationships, that when I can be with people that accept me no matter how I show up, whether it's happy or sad or angry or ugly or messy, and they'll love me no matter what. When I realized there were people in my life that didn't care, I mean, they just loved me for who I was, that was a huge shift for me. Do you get the same thing out of your sponsors and those close relationships?
I do. And, for me, I have some pretty deep trust issues that I'm still working through. And so I have 2 people that, I have that level of trust with out of all the people I know and all the relationships I have. But that's enough for me right now. That helps me, and I'll be able to build more as long as I'm continuing to reach out and be honest and vulnerable and have these connections with people.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to have a whole bunch of them. I think you have to have at least one, and 2 or 3 is great. But
yeah.
But I agree, you got to start somewhere, and recognizing that relationships are hard. Would you say that relationships contributed to your relapses and your struggle? Or I guess maybe a better question is, how do relationships, intimate relationships, sexual, partnership relationships, how do those play into your recovery?
Yeah. I think relationships for me is probably high, if not number 1 on the list for contributing to, struggles in my life, relapses that I had. I went through unhealthy relationships, whether they were friends or spouses or sexual partners. And, I think, it boils down to like I was seeking someone else for my own internal happiness. And, it took some very hard feedback from counselors, from, peers, other people in recovery, listening to stories in the rooms and, arguments and, failed attempts at marriages. I've been married twice, and, it was definitely a struggle. But I think key relationships, like having, positive relationships, have really helped me. And so, trying to find the balance of like, because of course everybody has relationships, and some are positive, some are negative, but like, do I have to buy into the negative ones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. And that can get you right back into that cycle of, if you get a message that you're not worthy and you're not good enough, then it can send you back into that cycle.
Yeah, the negative self-talk is something that I've struggled with most of my life. I constantly told myself that I wasn't good enough. That I couldn't do it, that nobody would ever love me, that I was unlovable. And that's that's a long battle that I still go through today. Is trying to change that way of thinking. But the more I am in recovery and the more I help others in recovery, like there's a scale. The negative self-talk and the negative beliefs are starting to outweigh, or not outweigh, sorry, the positives are starting to outweigh those negatives. And those are, by the actions that I have. Because my thoughts come and go, but when I can actually refute them with, actions that I've taken, I can say, no, that's not true. Like, you've done this, this, and this. Like, you are doing this. You are a good person.
Because you've got to, you really have to pay attention to those thought processes and the negative feedback, the negative thoughts and messages that are in there, and refute them and say, yeah, no, that's not even true because of this and this and this.
Yeah, but yet be careful not to get caught up into intellectualizing it and to really think like, how am I feeling about this? Because the emotional stuff is what has saved me. Like, getting into my heart and out of my head. Has been the most, grueling and beautiful process.
It's hard because I like my head.
Yes.
I like that logical place, right?
Yes.
It's like it's safe. I know how to think through it, right? And I don't have to feel it all.
Yeah, exactly.
But there is something beautiful that happens when you can get vulnerable like that and connect with those feelings and let them have an expression, right?
Yeah.
Because isn't that what depression is? Isn't that what anxiety is? Is all of those emotions and feelings being held in and not expressed?
Yeah. Yeah, and me not having an outlet for that for so many years, whether it was my choice or not, like that helped me stay, sick.
I'm curious, and the therapist in me wants to ask, were those, at 12 years old, were those negative thoughts about yourself, were those yours? Or did those come from somewhere else?
I'd say both, or all of the above, like environmental, family, and, school. I was bullied in school. From a very young age, first grade, second grade, third grade, I remember very strongly, getting in a fight, being beat up, being told, that I was different and being teased. I grew up in LA area, and I got my ear pierced when I was really young, third grade. And then I got it ripped out of my ear in fourth grade. Like, when I moved up to a smaller town, I was the queer. Because of the ear piercings. It wasn't, society hadn't accepted it at that point, and then my parents, telling me, some of those shaming conversations of like, I raised you better than this. They mean well, I think. I know so. But for me, they hurt, and so, I have that struggle for perfectionism because of how I was raised, and I had to be perfect. And when I didn't meet that level of expectation, then I was less than.
And you can never achieve perfection.
Correct.
And you could never be enough, right? You could never satisfy, because as soon as you did something good, it would just be followed with, well, what about the next thing?
Well, and that's exactly what it was, is I never really stopped to enjoy and revel in that moment. It was just the expectation. Oh, yeah, I achieved what I was supposed to. Like, no big sweat. So.
No value to you. It was just, I have to do what what's expected of me.
Yeah, definitely.
And so here you are in recovery for 9 years and working in the industry. You work in the recovery industry. Talk about kind of how long have you been working in the recovery industry, and what is that like for you?
Yeah, so I got very motivated, fresh out of treatment, to work in the industry. I went through originally a very intensive inpatient program. It was 90 days of a residential treatment where I lived on site, and then it was 90 days of an outpatient treatment that I went to every single day. And after that 6-month process, I was allowed an opportunity to start working in the industry. And I went back to school, and I decided, hey, I'm going to do this. And I got about 4.5, 5 years into working in the industry, and I had a breakdown. I realized that emotionally I was not as healthy as I thought I was, and I wasn't working my own program. I was relying on the job, for my recovery. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped talking to my sponsor. I wouldn't sponsor other people. And I thought that I could have both, as one. And, I stopped working in the industry after that, actually. I spent about 2 years thinking I'm never going to go back to working in recovery. It's just not for me. And, I went and did some other, I sold cars professionally for a little while. Realized I didn't like that. And, really took a long, hard look at, what enriches and empowers my life. Helping others really gives me purpose and drive. And I said, okay, I'm gonna go back into working in the industry, but I've got to have some very strong boundaries in place, Shelley. I really do, because it is harder for me, and this isn't the case for everyone, but it is harder for me to work in recovery and be in recovery at the same time. Simple little things like, you have a client who brings in drugs when they get checked in. And, that's availability to me. Like, that's scary. As much as I want to say, like, that doesn't affect me, oh, it does. Like, and I've got to put accountabilities in place, with other staff members. And so I don't handle that stuff anymore. It's just not for me, I have to know my limits. I have to have my own separate 12-step meetings than the ones that, people that I work with go to, because otherwise I don't feel like I can be 100% vulnerable and honest in a meeting, in an environment, where a client has come into treatment and been in, and is there currently trying to recover themselves. And so I have to separate, and it takes extra effort for me.
That, I'm hearing what you're saying, and some of it feels contradictory to what healing and recovery is, that you can't show up. And I get the fine line, right? Because it makes sense that here you are in a professional role, you're running a facility, you have to present yourself professionally, and yet you have a recovery story, and you don't feel like you can be totally authentic with that recovery story in that professional role.
Yeah. I think, for me, and someday I might be able to. I know that it has bitten me in the butt, in the ass, I guess you could say. Like, I have been 100% authentic before, and then I've had, it hurt someone else's recovery, because they were, offended, or, they felt like they couldn't trust me. And that's something I can't control. Like, I can't control how much someone else trusts me. And I've got to maintain trust with what I do. And so in order for me to maintain that trust, I have to be guarded at times. But outside of that, I can be completely vulnerable. and honest with my support system, you know.
You can have both.
Yeah, and I can share my story with people in recovery. I just, you know, I think for me, like the difference is like, am I sharing my story for my recovery, or am I sharing my story for their recovery? Is there a purpose behind why I'm talking about these certain things? And if it's for me, then it's wrong. You know, because I work in the industry, and so I have to do what's right for the client and what's for, you know, the person in recovery.
So talk a little bit now about where you work and how you ended up there and your vision for where you're going.
Yeah, definitely. So I work for Moonlight Mountain Recovery. We are Idaho's premier treatment center. We've got 3 facilities currently. One in Pocatello, well, 2 in Pocatello. There's a residential, an outpatient facility, and then we have a sober living house. And you know, I got that opportunity actually through you. You introduced me to the owners. Thank you very much. It was a very good melding of a relationship, because the owners are very passionate. You know, they're I think, you know, so many different facilities can get caught up in the money that can be made, and they lose track of, you know, providing a genuinely helpful program, and then, you know, offering good resources to the community. And, you know, I feel that I have that with this company. You know, the goals that we have together is to be a resource to, you know, all of Idaho and you know, surrounding states. Like, and I just get a different feel, you know, working with everyone here. Everybody enjoys what they do. You know, there's not one employee that doesn't have passion for, you know, recovery and what they do. And it just makes the days go by so much easier, Shelley. Like, I don't feel like I'm working at times.
So you can really focus on helping people and putting a program together that makes a difference and that you see change lives.
Yeah, definitely. And the program that we have designed, I feel, is a really good program. You know, we've got accountabilities in place. We've got, you know, a very strong peer accountability culture. You know, we will work a 12-step program or a holistic program, you know, if somebody is a non-12-step, if, you know, and that's the hard part. Like, I think in my recovery, I got into points where I thought, hey, there's only one way to reach recovery. You know, you have to go through, you know, the 12-step program. But that's not the truth. You know, there's many people achieve recovery many different ways. And we allow that. You know, we've got some very different, you know, minded therapists and you know, caseworkers and support staff. And, you know, some of them are in recovery and some of them aren't. But we allow, you know, individualized needs, and we can provide that.
Which I think is super important, because we all come from different perspectives and different walks of life. And so we have to be able to find our path to recovery, or their path to recovery, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a balance too. Like, if you just allow a client to dictate their own recovery, it's not going to work. Because what we do, what they do, wasn't working. So
right, they thought it was.
yeah, like, so there's got to be some intervention in there.
Sure.
You know, you got to steer them in the right direction. But
well, and a lot of education, right? A lot of skill training and learning, and, you know, and being vulnerable, right? Making those connections that can be really hard to make.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've mentioned it a couple of times. You know, the opposite of addiction is connection. And, you know, it doesn't matter how you're achieving that connection, as long as you're building connection, you know, being honest and vulnerable and willing, you know, a level of willingness goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, and healthy connection, right? Because there's
Yes.
a lot of connection that's not healthy, but you're looking for that solid connection that allows you to, you know, be vulnerable in a safe place, that allows you to share whatever's coming up, like you talked about with your sponsor, be able to say, I'm thinking about using today, and not be shamed for that, right?
Yeah.
Because they know how to respond and they understand right where you're at.
Yeah, I think the worst thing, that has happened in my life is when I can feel like being vulnerable and honest to people, and then I feel like that was the wrong thing to do because of something they've said or the way I feel judged. They might not have been judging me, but I took it that way, So having the right connections with those individuals is essential. It's definitely 100%.
Yeah, I think the message that goes through my head, it's something Brene Brown said, is that not everybody deserves to hear your story. And so you still have to set boundaries. And, there are certain people that earn the right to hear your story, and there's some that don't, and they're not safe yet. And you kind of have to know who those are, I think. Because I would, I've relate to that. I've shared my story or shared experiences that were personal and went, that just didn't go over the way I thought it should have or would have,
Yeah, 100%. I've done it several times throughout my life, and some people are ready for recovery, and some people aren't. I think as a nation, like, I would love to see the trends change.
Yeah.
We put money into incarceration, into the wrong programs, and I would love to see, as a nation as a whole, us start investing in recovery, in treatment, into people's lives.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because, early on in my counseling career, I worked in a halfway house where women are coming out of prison, and listening to their stories and the childhood neglect and abuse that they experienced. It was not hard to go, well, why in the world are they in prison? They need help. I mean, they really need help. They've been disadvantaged their whole life, and they need help. And granted, there's that balance of protecting society, but prison wasn't the place where they were going to get the help they needed. And then we end up institutionalizing them, and that's a tough thing. So I agree. I think shifting some of those things, having better programs. I think we're getting there, but it's sure slow.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm part of a networking group in Idaho, and so I meet with each member of the networking group on a weekly basis, and it's so large, and I'm learning quite a bit. But these individuals that I meet with, some of them really don't understand recovery at all, and I'm this is 2021, and I think, like, hey, shouldn't everyone in the world know what recovery is and what treatment is like? And people just don't, like, and there's nothing wrong with them not knowing. It's just that they just don't know. Like, it's not mainstream enough yet, and there's just not enough programs out there,
or it hasn't come close enough to touching their lives where they've had to see somebody go through that up close and personal. It's like when a recovery center wants to show up in a neighborhood, and all the neighbors are so against it and fight against it, and it's everything you can do to get that facility established there. And then you have these neighbors that just love everything that you contribute and everything that this program stands for and the people that it helps.
And those are the neighbors that get the free weed pull-in from the treatment people.
And then they go,
because we're all about service. We're all about service and helping out. And
but the idea of having those kind of people, which it's everybody, it's our people too, it's our family, it's our loved ones too, but they just don't have that frame of reference and the experience, and so it's hard to swallow that and go, darn it, more people need to understand this.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, like, once it touches their lives, then their belief systems and their thought processes change. Like, when they can experience it, and it sucks, like, that people have to go through that in order to understand it, because I don't wish, even my worst enemy, I don't really have any, but still, like, it's just a phrase, an addiction, like,
right.
It's not something that I'm ever, going to be rid of. I'm a full believer, like, I think that by doing, certain steps throughout my day, I achieve a relief for that day, for that moment, you know. But when I stop doing those things, you know, my old way of thinking creeps back in. The insanity comes, you know. And so as long as I'm doing that, then I am recovered, you know.
As long as you do your everyday, your daily pieces, right? The healthy things that you have to put in place.
Yeah, and it's different for, you know, many people. It's, you know, I watched a recovery talk one time, and this guy talked about, you know, writing, did I take my insulin today, on a mirror? And he's not a diabetic, but that for him, that was, is he doing what he needs to do for his recovery today? And he was relating it to like a disease, you know, like the insulin. Like, if you're diabetic and you don't take your insulin, you're in hot water.
You're gonna die.
You're gonna die.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it's amazing, you know, to think of it that way, but it is like, do what you need to do, you know, do your step. For me, it's my step work, you know, step 1, 2, and 3. Like I gotta wake up and admit that I'm an addict, you know, and that there's a power out there greater than me that's going to restore me to sanity as long as I am willing and reach out and ask for help. Like that's my step 1, 2, 3. That's my daily routine.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing those things, I'm happier. I'm sober. I'm in recovery.
Which is so powerful. So where do you see your future?
Yeah, great question. So I don't know, to be honest. I know what I want to do. You know, I've got goals to continually expand, you know, the recovery network of Idaho. That's my goal. You know, whether it's community resources, whether it's treatment centers, whether it's personal impacts on people's lives. I spent many years in Utah, and, you know, I recently moved to Idaho, and there's not as big of a recovery network there as there is in other places. And, you know, I think that I can provide a lot. And I think that the owners and Moonlight Mountain Recovery can provide a lot. I'm in a position where, you know, I have that ability to, and the responsibility to help others who are less fortunate or who don't understand or don't have the resources. And I take that responsibility, you know, with you know, great effort, and it's not something that I want to squander, you know.
Well, I think that's a big point, is that, you know, when you're in recovery, you get a lot given to you, right? You give a lot of effort put in to help you recover, to not do more than you're doing yourself, but there's a lot that goes into that. And when when you've really moved to another level, is you want to give back, you want to contribute, and you want to make a difference. And I think that's huge. So I love to hear that you feel like it's a responsibility, because I think you're right. I also think that's part of your recovery.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was freely given so much, and, you know, if I don't then in turn share that with others, you know, I mentioned it with the, you know, the service. Like it's a huge thing when I can get outside of myself and get into service. Like, Shelly, I can't tell you how many times that a simple service project has kept me sober. Seriously, like, you know, and I'll tell myself, like, I don't want to do that today. And early in my recovery, whenever I hear the phrase, you know, hear myself say the phrase, I don't want to do that, I kind of force myself to do it, unfortunately, but fortunately,
Right.
because it saved my life.
Yeah. Well, and there's something magical about service, and maybe somebody can put words on what that is, but the way that I feel after I've done something for somebody else is incredible. And it could be a simple thing like smiling and seeing that frown that they had, or that, you know, creased brow lift. It could be that simple, and I did something. I touched somebody's life. I made a difference. It's huge, and it shifts everything, the way I feel. And I imagine it's similar for you.
It is. Yeah, it is. And, you know, it is simple, like you said. You know, it can be as simple as holding a door for someone, or taking a moment to ask them how they're doing for their day. And then when they say, oh, I'm doing great, pause. So how are you really doing? Like, that's service.
Yeah,
You know?
it is. Well, it's connection. It's that very connection thing we've talked about several times.
Yeah.
Justin, I love that you were willing to share your story and share some of your experiences and your wisdom with us. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot of things, and it's really it's helped me, even think about some of the things that I want to go and do, right? And given me the courage to go, you know what, you need to do more. You need to do a little bit more, and that sense of responsibility to make a difference. So I appreciate your thoughts and your recovery. It's not easy, and I honor you for being willing to share that story and staying in recovery, because it's huge.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate it, and I'm blessed to have this opportunity, truly, to talk about just those little impactful things, and my life and what I've gained in recovery and what I want to still give, and like you said, that responsibility that I feel. Appreciate it.
If people want to get a hold of you, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think the best way is to reach out to me on our business Facebook page, or through email. Mm-hmm. It's jmccoy, MCCOY, at moonlightmountainrecovery.com. If you go to our website as well, moonlightmountainrecovery.com, there's a phone number, or you can just go to the info area and just go ahead and throw my name in there, and I'll receive it.
Oh, fantastic. That makes it easy. And there's a lot of work to be done in Idaho, as it sounds like you're finding out. So what a great place for you to be.
Yeah, thank you. It is.
All right. Well, fantastic then. And really, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Shelley.